schönen guten Tag, herzlich willkommen zur Media Convention am letzten Tag auf Bühne 6 und herzlich willkommen zur Session VR-Productions, New Realities, New Production Methods and New Rules. Für alle, die nicht so gut Englisch sprechen oder lieber auf Deutsch diese Session hören wollen, die müssen sich am besten jetzt ein Übersetzungsgerät hinten links bei der Tür holen, denn ab jetzt werden wir diese Session komplett auf Englisch machen. Es wird zwischendurch immer Q&As geben, da dürfen Sie Fragen natürlich auch gerne auf Deutsch stellen. Ich werde das dann übersetzen, beziehungsweise unser Translator hinten in der Box. We'll talk about VR, AR, and all the other different Rs today with three people who will each give a presentation of about 15 minutes, and then we'll have 5 minutes Q&A afterwards. And our first speaker used to be in politics. He used to be the British Consul General in New York, as well as the Director General of UK Trade and Investment. And today he is the COO of Blippar, a technology company that specializes in augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and computer vision. Please welcome on stage Danny Lopez.
Hi, thank you very much for that intro. Great to be here in Berlin. I'm sorry that I can't do this in German. I would like to, so maybe in a couple of years' time I'll try and do that. But today I wanted to cover where we are in terms of augmented reality, a term that's... How many of you feel familiar with augmented reality? How many do you think you'd be able to sort of define augmented reality to a friend in less than 20 seconds? In both German and English? Okay, so what I want to do today is talk about where we are in terms of augmented reality. You know, is it hype? Is it already over? The answer is no, otherwise this would be a very short presentation. And also to think about where it's going. You know, we've spoken a lot over the last few years about augmented reality, and for those of you who are a little closer to the space, what happens around every November or December is that people ask themselves the question of, will next year be the year of augmented reality? This has been happening for around 7 or 8 years now. Always the same question, and always trying to figure out whether the following 12 months will really be the year when AR becomes mainstream. And actually, we do feel that over the last few months, we've seen a number of changes that suggest that AR will become more and more part of our lives. Some of those changes are because the big players, like Apple and Google, have introduced the likes of AR Kit and AR Core, which allow developers to be able to create augmented reality experiences. And other big players like Facebook and Amazon have publicly said that they are investing very heavily in the space and that they see it very much as part of their future strategy. A little bit about us. We've been in this game for around 7 years. We have delivered campaigns, advertising campaigns through augmented reality for over 2,000 global brands. We have our own software, proprietary software that allows people to create augmented reality experiences. And you see we've got around 25,000 creators around the world. So AR, how many of you use Pokemon Go? See, whenever I ask this question, I always feel like I get around 4% of the room admitting that they use Pokemon Go. The reality, as you all know very well, is that 500 million plus use Pokemon Go at its peak, and it only took around 20 days for it to have 100 million users. Snap, of course, very much relies on AR, and the third picture is an episode of Black Mirror. So AR, on the one hand, feels still a little bit gimmicky, a little bit like it is at the beginning of its journey, but actually, without realizing, there is already mass adoption of the technology. A few figures. It's suggested that over the next 4 or 5 years, the market of AR and VR combined will be around $105 billion, which is absolutely outstanding. And if you think about that sort of figure, the reality is that VR is a smaller part of it, and AR is a very large part of it. Now, clearly, you don't get to $90 billion through a gimmicky type of technology. So we're talking about hardware, we're talking about ad spend, we're talking about e-commerce, and all of those will become very big numbers. A few statements there from people you all recognize and companies you all recognize. And as I said earlier, very much the message of the big guys now, for the first time over the last 12 months or so, have made very clear that AR is, yes, in its infancy, but a core part of the strategy. And I think that's kind of the key here, that we are still at the very much the starting line of where this space is going to grow over the next few years. A number of you will recognize this rather famous graph from Gartner, and the notion that augmented reality is now, in a way, in a rather sad place. It's kind of the sad place because it's kind of the area that you hang around in for quite some time before your technology really takes off. And augmented reality has been there for probably 3 years or so, because initially, 7, 8 years ago, there was masses of excitement, people really, really embracing what this was all about, very much a tick in the innovation box, huge expectations about the innovation, and then people start trying to work out, well, hang on, well, how does this grow? How does this scale? How does this really take off and become a core part of my strategy? So why now? I've been talking a lot about the fact that it feels like we are really at that beginning stage where we get excited about what this means over the next few years. And there are 2 or 3 reasons that support the notion of AR becoming really huge over the next few years. The first one is the camera. We all know that we use the camera in our phone way more than we use our phone to make phone calls. That has happened now for the last 2 years or so. And if you look at this graph, what you see there is the evolution of how computing has developed and how we engage with computing power. So, 95 to 2000, for those of you who remember that period, we were quite happy to use a phone as a keyboard. And then, if you think about it, what we're doing is mimicking senses here, like our own senses. So once we felt comfortable with that keyboard notion, we went into touching. The touch screen then evolved into talking into our phone. And now, of course, we use our camera for so much, because the reality is that 80% of our senses are driven by sight. The second one, and this probably is the sort of biggest message I would love to leave you with today, is that the way to scale augmented reality is to make sure that it is inextricably linked with artificial intelligence. How many of you, out of interest, would be able to, just to ask you the same question, define what computer vision is? So, computer vision, this is then therefore my sort of most important message, I guess, of this talk. Computer vision is the branch of artificial intelligence that understands sight, that mimics sight. And the idea is that you develop software that allows your camera lens to become an intelligent interface with the physical world. So your camera lens essentially now takes on a whole new level of intelligence where it understands the physical world. It doesn't just recognize things, it understands them like a human being would. And if you think about it, augmented reality is all about overlaying digital content on the physical world. But the key word of augmented reality is not augmented, it's reality. Because the first thing you need to do is to understand what is in front of you. So we talk a lot about the fact that how can you look to augment reality if you don't understand reality in the first place? And that's what the AI is bringing, true understanding of the physical world that you're engaging with. And if you do that, then the camera lens essentially becomes an extension of your eyesight. It becomes the third eye with which we engage with the world. A couple of concepts. One is SLAM. Some of you will have heard about it. It's essentially geometric understanding of the positioning of the phone, not to get too technical, but it allows you to be able to place objects exactly where you want them in front of you. And then the more traditional semantic computer vision is essentially recognizing what's in front of you, understanding it, and me being able to say, people, chairs, wall, pillar, and really recognize what's in front of me. And then, of course, the third element, so we've spoken about the camera, we've spoken about artificial intelligence. The third element is actually being able to create these experiences in a simple way. And this is just an example of the creator tool that we have that through JavaScript allows people to be able to create AR experiences. A little example, so I've mentioned SLAM, essentially positioning the digital content exactly where you want it. This is how IKEA use this, being able to give, this is not just sort of a gimmicky campaign, this is actually part of IKEA's strategy to be able to allow their consumers, their customers, to place the furniture in their living room. And in makeup, I mean, you can just imagine how this is absolutely key because, the last thing you really want to do is spend all morning trying makeup on and taking it off and trying it on again. So actually the ability to do this through digital engagement is a huge market. There's an app called Makeup, and that has 250 million downloads, and the potential for the makeup industry, which actually we're very involved in, is huge. And training, manufacturing, again, so many examples. Gone are the days where you need thousands and thousands of pages to be able to understand a piece of advanced engineering in front of you. You can do all of that through AR, and you have far more accuracy in terms of how you're engaging with what's in front of you. I'm going to whiz through this. Now, I'm going to do this really quickly. Always a huge, huge risk to do a live demo, especially when you don't really know whether I have enough 4G, but I'm going to try anyway. And if I can just have the screen become my phone, we have an app called Blipper. And so the first thing I'm doing now is, can you see words come up? Yeah. OK, so essentially, my phone is now trying to understand what's in front of me. And you see that some of the words make sense. I mean, this looks a little bit like a live concert venue. Sometimes it says really good-looking people, and I'm not really getting that at the moment, so sort of you need to concentrate more. And then, sometimes it'll recognize an actual entity, and now there's the hand. Oops. And now, a little bit like those early days of Google, I actually went in to look for more information about a hand, and I can link it now to thousands of entities. So this is an example of trying to recognize the physical world and understanding it. And then when it comes to doing that for the consumer world, this is a little example of a campaign that we did for Coke. Not quite a paper cup, but close. And then, this is where I don't have enough internet connection. What should happen is that I would load up a campaign that, there you go, that we created for Coke. And all of a sudden, your Coke can becomes a Spotify jukebox. Headphones go in, and I now have a jukebox in front of me. So you've seen two things there. We'll go back to the presentation, please. You've seen two things there. You've seen me trying to recognize what's in front of me and making sense of the physical world. And I can do that with hundreds and thousands of entities in front of me. And then you've seen an example, an application of using a branded product to be able to recognize it and then bring it to life. Now, I'm going to leave you with a few thoughts of where this is going. So the first one is, think about literally picking up food and ingredients, could be anything from a potato to a banana, and just pointing at it. Now, you might get information about what's in front of me, but what if, all of a sudden, supermarkets, restaurants, and other companies were able to bid real time, so when you point at that product or when you point at that entity, you get their message. And it feels a little bit like those early days, again, of the internet, where people are kind of, buying up domain search names and sort of trying to figure out how to monetize everything that's in front of them. This is kind of where this is going. Gabe, right in front of me, I like your top, beautiful white top. Now, what if I essentially point at the top, and I might not know exactly where it's from, but what if all of a sudden a whole bunch of retailers are bidding real time so that what you see is a link to their catalog to be able to buy something that is as similar as possible to what I'm looking at. So this is where a lot of this is going. This is a little example of work that we've done with an insurance company in the US. We recognize every single car in the US market, literally every car. With 99% certainty, we can give make, model, and year. You can see how easy this becomes for an insurance company to provide quotes to their users of the car that they happen to have in front of them, and then pre-populate the forms. Think how much time you spend with insurance forms. That all gets pre-populated. And what about walking? This is in London, literally right next to our office. What about walking down the street and having the shops that you're walking past be owned by that shop so that the virtual information that comes out at you is from that relevant store? So I'm literally walking down a street and I have restaurants, if I want, pushing information out because I happen to be right next to that store. We're applying this to navigation. We have come up with a breakthrough technology called urban visual positioning, twice as accurate as GPS. We deep learn, we learn images of a city, and we're able to allow people to walk around. They're not looking at a map anymore. They have their phone in front of them, and the arrows and all the information is actually overlaid in front of you as it should be with the buildings as you see them. So essentially, and I'll end right now, where is this going? It's all about lenses. It's all about the camera lens engaging with the physical world, overlaying digital content that is relevant for you. The more lenses, the more engagement. It sounds scary, but if you apply it for all the right reasons, it is hugely, hugely valuable. So I hope you embrace AR. I hope this has given you a little flavor, and look forward to the Q&A. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Danny. Danny, you can stay right up, and we'll take questions from the audience if there are any. Just raise your arm, and you're more than welcome to ask questions. Yeah, there's the first one there.
Yes, I've got one question, Philip, my name, and what I see is that these are really impressive examples. They are always embedded into an ecosystem of their own, however, right? With a unique app in that case. So what you need for mass adoption is first a critical mass of users of that app before companies will start feeding their information into that app ecosystem. Or are you, to some extent, planning taking available information from huge platforms, from Google, for example, via APIs to feed that into those systems? What's your approach there?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I mean, in a way, there's two answers. First of all, we're completely app agnostic, and it's been a journey for us because we started very much as an app, and that's all we were. And we now realize that this is an ecosystem, to your point. So for us, it's app, somebody else's app. You know, the insurance company, you wouldn't even know Blipper is involved. They have an SDK, they have our technology, it's powered by Blipper, but you wouldn't know. We have augmented reality experiences now through the web, so through browsers, where again, you don't have an app. So yes, it's a combination of ecosystem, APIs, everybody embedding it into their technology. But I think also the second part to your question, which is very interesting, is, well, what happens if we move on from phones? Because you could argue that so much of this engagement with the physical world is slightly limited by the hardware, because you still have to walk around the street holding a phone doing this. A lot of people felt very comfortable with that during Pokemon Go. 500 million people didn't have a problem. But if we get this right, and the hardware deals with battery issues of headsets, cool factor of headsets, price, etc., then we really are heading into a space where there'll be less reliance on phone for this over the next few years, far more on headsets, and then this becomes a game of embedding your technology in the headset without the app. So the journey is very much there, but the reality is that the computing power we have in our phones right now is so great that you can see that for the next few years, user behavior will get used to that through their phones.
Next question here in the middle.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Tim, and I would like to know what you think about Magic Leap, the company Magic Leap.
I think they're doing some really, I mean, you know, this to some degree, sometimes a little bit of element of secrecy with some of the things that they're developing. But I think it's, you know, all part of strengthening this ecosystem. They're doing some really, really great things. Tremendous progress over the last few years. You can start seeing some of the applications already, and I think that's, you know, they are one of the, you know, kind of key components of the sort of development and progress of this ecosystem over the next few years. But I would start it with, you know, so many people talk about Google Glass a few years ago, which for many is just seen as, you know, a step that then just failed. And actually, they're all steps in the right direction. And some of them kind of became obsolete, but became, in a way, gave us the foundation of, you know, some of the things that we're developing. And I think Magic Leap now is doing some, you know, hugely interesting things, which will no doubt help the rest of the ecosystem.
Danny, I have one last question for you. You talked about computer vision quite a bit, and you said that's perhaps equally important, and cameras are becoming intelligent, sort of understanding our environment. How much do ethical concerns play into the development of the softwares you're doing?
Huge. I mean, this is, as you know, one of the key questions that we're all sort of grappling with and considering. I mean, it's just AI in general, where if we get this right, it'll be a conversation between private sector, public sector, regulators, and regulators in a way, they're doing their best, but they're playing catch up all the time because the technology is moving so fast. So the ethical component is absolutely huge. We think about it a lot, even with the age of people that engage with Blipper, what they're able to look at, etc. And it's an integral part of our strategy.
Thank you very much, Danny Lopez. Our next speaker is the head of the VFX unit at UFA Serial Drama and the driving force behind UFA's endeavors in VR, AR, XR, and what these are, he will explain now. Herzlich willkommen, Frank Roave.
Hi. Hello, I'm Franco Vara. I work for UFA Serial Drama. UFA is one of the oldest production companies in Germany. We have been around for over 100 years, and I will try to give you some insight on what VR, AR, and whatever R means for a very traditional company like UFA. Our main product at the moment is TV series, classic feature films, and TV shows. So how do we engage with VR? Whenever talking about virtual reality or augmented reality, I'd like to take a step back to the very early days of filmmaking, because I can sort of relate to that, and it feels like we are a bit at the pioneering time at VR and AR. And one of the very early problems that the movie industry had, or the moving image industry had, was not to bring movement to the screen or to the human eye, because we knew at that point already how it worked. We knew that the eye was sort of lazy, and we could cheat it, and we could make it believe that it was seeing a movement when it was actually just seeing still frames. And that was sort of the start of a whole creative and technical odyssey, with just one goal, basically. How can we make the image more perfect? How can we add color? How can we add sound? How can we increase the resolution of our screens, of our monitors? How can we make the sound more realistic? And you can say that the whole technical road that we've seen in movie and television has sort of had one main purpose, basically making it more immersive. And that is where it is sort of relating to the whole virtual and augmented reality team at the moment. So now we are basically facing the same challenges as 150 years ago. How do we bring real-life characters into the VR world? When we're looking at it now, at many of the VR and AR projects we're seeing, we rarely have real characters. We have avatars, we have animated characters, basically computer-generated images in our VR experience. And that is not the UFA DNA. We're used to work with real characters, real emotions, telling real stories. So we're basically facing this huge challenge. How do we get the real characters into the virtual reality? How do we get the reality into virtual reality? And that is why we have set the goal to create what we call, and it's probably very poor English translation, the Walkable Movie. a movie that you can walk around in, a free viewpoint movie with real actors, a movie in a true sense of the word. And the way we've done this, or we are trying to do this, is by using a technology called volumetric video. UFA has been working together with Fraunhofer Institute for a long time. We've been working together on 360-degree projects, and we sort of felt that 360-degree was not giving us what we needed for having that true immersive feeling of being inside a movie. So Fraunhofer had been working on volumetric video for quite a few years, and we decided to team up with them to take this media to the next level, to make it more of a production tool and less of a scientific research project that they had. And this cooperation worked for, we've been working on that for about 2 years. And basically what we in Fraunhofer managed to do was to set up a studio which suits our needs in the most perfect sense. It is basically, it is similar to a green screen, but it's a white screen. It is a complete tunnel of light, if you want to call it like that. The reason for that is that we need to record somewhere where we have no specific light. We don't want to have a certain light direction or whatever, because we want to relight our 3D models that will come out of this studio in the end in a real-time situation. So this studio is equipped with 32 5K cameras. So we generate at the end a resolution of about 150K per frame. So it's an enormous battle of data and processing time that we're fighting here. So this studio has been set up in a smaller version here in Berlin, and I will talk later about the big one we're setting up in Potsdam later this year. This is what it looks like in this chamber of horrors. It is still a bit difficult because we can only shoot one actor at a time, and he is sitting in a complete abstract room full of light. But it's the only way to do it at the moment. Here you can see one of the actors, which is in a VR experience we did to commemorate the 100-year existence of UFA. You can see this experience, if you like, next to the Media Cube. There are some colleagues who are actually presenting this experience at the moment. Here are some more pictures to give you a feel about what the studio looks like, how it works. There's a lot of light involved and a lot of cameras. In the back, you can see these little black dots. They are the actual cameras. They're always paired in as stereo pairs. We will have a look at that later, why we need that. So this is the workflow that we have. We basically have 32 cameras all generating single images from all sides, from all angles. And from this original image, which we have in stereo pairs, we can generate depth maps, which are still a 2D, a 2D media. But from that, we can generate 3D meshes. And now we're already one step further into bringing 3D characters in a virtual environment. The problem is at this moment, this mesh is still extremely dense. It's a point cloud of millions of points, and you would not be able to integrate this into any virtual reality experience. So what needs to be done is the whole thing needs to be simplified. It needs to go through several stages of improving the mesh and simplifying it, more or less a compression stage. And this is the rendered model we end up with at the end. So we now have a fully textured character which has been recorded with 25 frames per second, which also means that we have 25 geometries and 25 textures per second. So it is still a media which needs a lot of performance. Now, what does the future look like? As I said before, we are actually at this moment setting up one of the few volumetric studios that are available in Europe at the moment. Partners in this venture are ARI, which I think everybody knows. Fraunhofer Institute, of course, as one of the main suppliers of technology. Interlake, which is a company based also in Potsdam-Babelsberg, which basically manages a lot of media IT. Studio Babelsberg, of course, because we're using their studios. And UFA, because we like to do volumetric video. The whole thing will be called VoluCap and will open at in the middle of June, which is very ambitious to get it running by then. And the whole thing is part of MediaTek Hub Potsdam-Babelsberg, which means we will also have a lot of interaction with the film university based in Potsdam. We will be doing a lot of research and development projects. And basically that's also necessary because this technology, and there I would like to go back to the pioneering days of the movie industry, we are still at the black and white stage at this moment. I mean, people tend to get very disappointed when they put on VR goggles and they go like, oh, but it's so pixely or it's a bit shaky or whatever. I mean, this is normal. This is not a technology which is finished in a sense that we have reached the end of the road. We need to do a lot of improvement, especially in compression of data files. I mean, the experience that you can see outside is about 30 gigabytes big, so it's not something you can distribute through Steam or anything like that. So we are working on that at the moment. We are working together with Microsoft, which you might think is a competitor in this sense. In reality, they're not really a competitor. They also have a volumetric studio. I think they have 3 by now. But they're not really interested in being a studio owner and providing studio services. They just want to get the spread of the technology out there, so that everybody hopefully will be doing VR, AR with volumetric video in the next couple of years. So that is where the road is going at the moment. We're also working together with the MPEG Commission to basically settle on a 3D compression standard for volumetric video. And we still have a long way to go, but we are very happy that we will be actually opening this first volumetric studio in Germany on the 12th of June. And I would like you to invite to come and see it and to go and see our volumetric experience with the guys from VoluCap and Fraunhofer here at the exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Questions from the audience? Just again, same game, raise your arm. There, in the middle.
Hello, thanks for the insight. And my question is, how are those volumetric videos going to be consumed? Are we going to sit in a cinema room with VR goggles, or are they just for home consumption?
That is a very good question. I mean, this is also a subject which is still fluctuating at the moment. At the moment, we're still seeing things through virtual reality goggles, through a Classic 5 or something. At the moment, it's the only way to reproduce these things. Like in the old days, you had to go out to the cinema, and you could not see a movie at your home on demand. You could not see it on your cell phone. We're basically at that stage where a lot of the stuff is still very location-based. And this is also a problem with which I have to admit with the business model behind the whole thing. Because if you're offering this to a client or whatever, they can only use it basically location-based at the time. So it would be something which a shop owner could put in his flagship store, or which could be on an exhibition or whatever, but it's not something you can spread at this time for a wide audience. And as I said, we're still working on compression files. We have Microsoft, we have the MPEG Commission involved there. Everybody's working really close together, and I'm actually surprised about that, because normally with products like this you would have a lot of secrecy, but this is all extremely open, and everybody at most me is very surprised about this.
Other questions from the audience? Right there in the back.
Hello. So you have a mesh of the character for each frame of the film, right? So I'd like to know how close you are from rigging this mesh in order to make the acting of the actor editable in an animated way.
That is a very good question. To be quite honest, this is not one of our priorities, because we want to capture real life action, and we do not want to create the next motion capturing system or a 3D scanning of a body and then animate it through a classic method. But nevertheless, we see that there are applications where you would need a consistent mesh and a consistent texture. And a lot of people are working on this at the moment, and we believe that within 6 to 12 months we will have this problem solved.
Frank, last question. Yep.
Yeah, I would have a question regarding the costs, actually. What are the costs, not in detail, but compared to a traditional 3D production? 3-fold, 5-fold, 10-fold, 100-fold?
No, I wouldn't go that far. Not to name an exact number, you're talking about the price of, say, a decent commercial. Same price per minute than you would pay for any decent commercial you would be shooting or you would be animating or whatever.
That's on par.
Sorry?
So that's an on-par price, you'd say?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Frank Roabe.
Thank you.
Our next speaker used to work for Facebook on social VR and content creation products. Today he works at Jigsaw and exploring how technology could perhaps make people safer. Please welcome on stage Gabriel Valdivia.
Hello. You guys hear me? Cool. Hi, my name is Gabe. I am going to talk to you guys about the user interfaces for virtual reality and augmented reality. We call that whole space immersive design, and we'll get to that in a second. For that, let me just tell you a bit more about me. I come from these companies here. I started working at a startup where we made a smart driving assistant that gave you information about how you drive. After that, I joined Facebook, where I worked on a suite of products for content creation and storytelling. And then from there, transitioned to VR, where I worked on introducing 360 media into the Facebook feed with 360 photos and 360 videos. After that, I worked on the standalone Facebook VR app called Facebook 360, where users could consume 360 media. And then finally, I worked on the social VR platform called Facebook Spaces, where users could create an avatar and interact with other users in virtual reality. And what I've noticed is in the last 10 years, our professions as designers have changed. And I've noticed a pattern where the content goes from it's transitioning from different mediums. So we started with graphic design, where we all worked in print, and we designed for the content to be consumed in from newsstands or magazines and things like that. Then content transitioned into the web, and all graphic designers kind of tried to evolve into web design, where we created interactions and so on. Then as the web became more mature, we started using Flash, animating content, and really taking design to be a more kind of flexible and malleable medium. Then mobile came along, and we had to kind of shrink all the content that we were working on and bring it to your hands, right? And make it more personal. And we started designing mobile first, and so on. And after that, designers became familiar with business goals and having a seat at the table, and product design came along. And that's where a lot of us are today. And what we've noticed is that the content has kind of shifted from the newsstands to your desktop, to your lap, and then to your hands. And we see that the next iteration is that content is going to be all around us. So the question is, once this happens, and this is an inevitability, how do we design for that? How do we create the interactions that allow you to interact with content that is all around you? In mobile and in the web, we've kind of relied on putting UI next to kind of the edges of the screen, the borders. You know, you have a like button in the bottom of the screen. You have an X to close out of a screen in the top left. But once you don't have a screen at all, you don't have a container for your content, how do you interact with it? And that's kind of what I want to cover in this talk today. So we're seeing immersive design in AR today. We've had great examples in our previous speakers. And AR is showing a lot of promise, and it's really great, but it's like they said before, it's in its infancy, especially in the way we interact with it. So we're still interacting with it through a phone, right? So we have this idea of kind of a window into another world. So a lot of the interactions that you see are, tapping the phone itself, and we put buttons on the phone, just like we do on mobile and on the web. And the field of view, kind of the window in which you look at the world, it's not very immersive yet. It's still kind of experienced through the frame of your phone. So I think that VR is really the best way to explore immersive design today. VR is where you can have natural interactions, you can have your full hands in that environment, and you can have the contents around you everywhere. So you don't have to put a phone in front of you, or look at the content through kind of an abstraction of a window. You can just be in the content. You can walk through the movie. You can experience everything as if you were there. So we can use VR today to kind of explore and prototype the design solutions that we'll need for whenever AR becomes truly around us, and we're all walking around with glasses and contact lenses. So the question is, how do you design for VR? How do you create these interactions? I go back to kind of what I've been told, studying graphic design, that we need to get out of the way. That design needs to, good design is as little design as possible. You need to get out of the way and just give room for the content, whatever it is that people came here to see. But again, once you merge the line between content and interactions, then it's really hard to define how to get out of the way if there's no way for you to go. Which kind of reminds me of this book by Marshall McLuhan, The Medium is the Message, where he argues that art and its medium have a symbiotic relationship. And the way you deliver art is part of the way you consume it. And in fact, this book, it was intended to be called The Medium is the Message, but when it was printed, there was a typo, and it was called The Medium is the Massage. And the author left it that way because it was such a proof of the whole thesis of the book. I really recommend it. And so we're seeing this in a lot of mediums. We're seeing this idea of that symbiosis between content and the way people interact with it. This is a still from a New York City play called Sleep No More, where the audience walks around a building, a 5-story building, and chases down actors to find kind of like their own story. And so we're seeing theater explore this. We're seeing this explored in movies. We have, the very famous Fight Club really plays with the narrative of the movie theater and the movie as a format. We're seeing this in video games. This is one of my favorites called Metal Gear Solid, where in order to beat a boss, you actually need to change your controller from the input 1 to the input 2 so that the boss can read your thoughts. So all these mediums are using this idea of merging these two concepts of the medium and the message. And I believe that this can translate to products as we kind of evolve into the immersive world. So in order to do that, we can take a lot of cues from video games. Video games have been tasked with the idea of creating immersive worlds, of making you feel like you're somewhere that you're not. But before we do that, let's play a game and let's try to define what UI is. And UI stands for user interface, and you guys can help me kind of understand what out of the examples that I'll give you are UI. So is this UI? Yeah, so a lot of people are nodding. Yeah, so this is very clearly a button, and people click it. That's what people usually understand as UI. This is also UI. Now we're mixing software and hardware buttons. This is also UI. This is the way you enter a house, right? For an architect, this is the way you interact with the house, which is a key part of the house. This is UI all around us, the way we interact with the city, the way we move around. Now we're entering the virtual reality. This is a game called The Climb, and this is the way you save your position in that game, but that is also UI, but you're seeing how it's now kind of merged into the world. And this is still from Facebook Spaces, the app that I worked on, where the avatars themselves are part of the UI, and the way you choose to represent yourself is the way you interact with the content itself. So one key thing for this to work is to start thinking in 3D and thinking of solutions to problems that are in 3D. So, for example, if we have this cup and we want to show the user how many sips they have left before the beverage runs out, right? Let's say they have water inside that cup, and you got to show them how it runs out. If you bring that problem to a designer, especially a designer that's been focused in the 2D medium, they're going to come up with solutions that they're familiar with. So they'll just say something like this. Like, I give you a pop-up, and it says 3 sips left, and I know exactly how many sips in order to go. This is a pattern from the mobile days, right? So we can say, no, let's make this a bit more immersive. Let's put it around the cup, and if you move the cup, it will stick around the cup, and it's just easier to see that way. But truly thinking in 3D is considering all the variables, right? So maybe the best solution is not this at all. It's just changing the cup itself, and inside the cup, then you can see how much beverages you have, right? So this is kind of an example of how thinking in 3D can change the way we relate content with the UI or the interactions with the content. So, like I said, gaming has a lot of great examples here because this is something they've done and for many decades now. And here are a few examples that I have where they've done similar things. So these are 2 games. They both have inventories or ways to manage your items. On the left, we have a game called PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and the way you check your inventory is just you press a button, and you have a different abstraction of your character, and over it you have different items. And on the right, we have Dead Space, where you walk up to a station, and in there you can interact with your inventory. So one of them is more immersive than the other, right? Or the way you check your menu. On the left, you have all these web-like interface in a medieval context that kind of takes you out of the game. And on the right, you have a map that you can just look down to within the game and interact with that tool. This is an example in VR where on the left, in order to kind of give you instructions how to interact here, you're kind of stopped and given a modal that you can only, the only thing you can do is read that modal. And on the right, we have a solution where the way they give you instructions is by placing a clipboard within the environment that you can grab and you can use as you would in the real world. And finally, even the way you enter a game is part of the interface, right? It's part of the content. So on the left, you have a menu that people can shoot through and just to select the game type. And on the right, you have cartridges that you can select, and each cartridge is a game mode. So the one on the right is much more immersive than the one on the left, which doesn't really have any sort of logic for why these buttons are here or what am I about to do. So we finally get this idea of using tools as extension of ourselves to interact with the content around us. And we can augment these tools to be especially relevant for whatever thing we're trying to do. And the final example I have for you guys is something that I worked on for Facebook Spaces. And it is this interface for choosing your avatar, right? And we've done this a million times in many games where you choose the different facial features for your avatar. And the problem with this is that, there's a lot of content. We need to choose between hundreds of thousands of different eye colors and eye shapes and chins and so on. And in order to give you an avatar that is really representative of yourself, we have to give you a ton of options to really be diverse. So the first time we did this, we did it using patterns that we knew. So we just basically took a 2D UI, we put it in VR, and we asked people to interact with it. And as we became comfortable with the medium, we started to develop other ways to do this. And one way is to use tools to interact with the UI. So we could, for example, use a mirror to change your makeup color, or you can use a blow dryer to change your hairstyle. And the blow dryer itself could have different modes and could allow you to be creative in the way you style your hair. You can make one part curlier, one part straighter, and so on. And now we're using a tool, and now we're interacting with the UI, and it's part of the experience. So no longer are we interacting with just a screen, but we're creating an experience from the things, from the way you interact with the content. So here's a small prototype of using this thing, and you would create this small mirror, and you could change the nose size, and the mirror itself could have UI, and you can, it can be augmented in ways that natural mirrors are not. So if you're tweaking your nose size, it could be zoomed into your nose, and so on, and you can have different tools that act differently. But this is an example of how we could use UI and make it part of the experience. And like this, you could imagine a world where everything is augmented, and you grab a cup, and there are things around the cup, or you grab a flashlight, there are things around that. But thinking in 3D and really thinking about volumetric UI is what leads to solutions like this. So to wrap up, as we talk about the way content has evolved and this kind of inevitable shift from consuming content within a container, whatever that is, whether it is a magazine, a screen of some sort, or a screen that you keep with you on your phone, to content being all around you, then the way we design experiences for that content needs to adapt and needs to be kind of intertwined with the experience itself. And I think for designers today and people that create the tools to interact with the content, it is helpful for us to start thinking about those things and hopefully create the interactions that we kind of take for granted in the future, kind of the pinch to zoom or the pull to refresh. Those things that we now think are obvious, we can start exploring today for the future of immersive design. That's me. Thank you.
All right, questions from the audience. You can just raise your, yep, we start in the back there, and then.
Hello, and thanks very much for your talk. It was really interesting to see these stages, and I really liked your McLuhan references there, so the extensions of man. And that brings me to my question, because the extension of some of our senses have really been implemented in media quite sufficiently, like the visual or the hearing senses. But what about touch? And especially from a designer point of view, what do you think would be the next step into the future to implement really one more sense?
Yeah, I think that's so there's the classic haptic suits or gloves that you use to interact with content, and I think we'll see always kind of a asymmetry between a select few that have access to really high fidelity input devices, like a full body suit that gives you full touch sensitivity, and there will be kind of the masses that have whatever is accessible, like a cardboard headset or something like that. So we'll have to kind of like balance those two for a long time. In the meantime, there are ways in which you could kind of simulate those senses. With, let's say, using audio or even visual cues, you could really get a sense that you're touching something. An example we have for that is in Facebook Spaces, you could be interacting with somebody that's across the world, and we prototype different ways in which you could high-five them. And just by using sound cues and audio cues, sound and visual cues, you could feel like you're actually touching that person and high-fiving them. You can feel the kind of the friction. So you can simulate some of those things with the tools we have today, but in the future we'll have really high fidelity ways of consuming that.
Next question. All right. Yep. Gabriel, how closely do you work together with those who develop the hardware for new experiences, design experience? Do you work with them at all, or is that two separate departments?
It's usually two separate departments that work really closely together. Especially whatever input capabilities you have are key to developing a design that best uses those capabilities. So whenever a new controller comes out that allows for different interactions, that is a key part of the decisions that we need to make to design a good experience. So that conversation is key.
All right, and we've run out of time, I'm afraid, but are you still here after the session for a little bit? Okay, so then everyone can ask some questions then. Thank you very much, Gabriel Valdivia. And we'll have a quick break, open up the doors, get some fresh air in, and then in 15 minutes we'll have Graham Roberts from the New York Times here who will talk about augmented reality and journalism. So come back for that or just stay.